The proceeding will start shortly.
In terms of His Majesty's Revenue and Customs. So my understanding, let me see if I've got this right, is that strategically you have a plan to move your communication with the law-abiding taxpayers of this land to a completely online platform with some ability for particularly vulnerable groups to interact with you by telephone. Have I understood your strategic plan correctly, Jayne-Anne?
It sounds slightly ahead of where we're at strategically. So all companies at the moment have a digital strategy, and therefore I think it's absolutely appropriate that HMRC has a digital strategy. Your point that our strategy is to have everybody dealing exclusively online, I think is not correct. Certainly our intention is to make sure that those people who are vulnerable or who aren't able to deal online can be served by talking to a human being. So I think it's an interesting balance, and the question really is the speed by which we develop in that direction.
Okay, Jim, how would you describe your strategy?
So, I describe our strategy as a digital-first strategy rather than a complete digital strategy. So we want customers who can use online services to try that as their first port of call, because we believe that our online services can handle the vast majority of transactions and queries. But we do obviously want to make sure that people who either can't use online services or who use them but find that they don't deal with their query, perhaps because it's complex, are able to speak to an HMRC advisor, and whether that be on the phone or by web chat at the end of the online journey. And the work that we've been doing has been to try to get customers to try online first where they can, but also to prioritise who our advisors deal with, so that they are dealing with that target group.
Angela, you trialled more of a digital only last summer, didn't you?
Yes.
And was that part of a strategic plan to move towards this digital first? Because I remember at the time there was really no notice for the public. So was that trial last summer part of your strategic plan?
Yes, I think one of the really the things that you'll see in all organisations, and I think HMRC is no different, is that actually some of these big changes, if you introduce them with no testing, with no approach to learn, then you can end up having some unintended consequences. And whilst we've made quite a lot of digital services available to customers, we've been, as you'll know, by far the majority of interactions with the UK tax system does in fact happen digitally already. We hadn't really tried hard to see what would happen if we pushed customers and withdrew other services from them to find out what we needed, how we needed to support those vulnerable customers, how we needed to adjust our services. So the trial was absolutely a part of learning, and definitely some things worked really well during that trial, some things we learned from and improved as we went along, but actually learning is part of what's really important as we drive this.
So it sounds like there is a strategic plan towards a digital-first HMRC, and it sounds as though last summer's trial was part of that journey. And so I assume, even though you are a non-ministerial department, that strategic journey would have been put in front of both the Financial Secretary and the Chancellor and would have had their complete buy-in. Am I correct, Jim?
Yes, and the Financial Secretary is on record as saying that he is in support of the strategy. Whilst we are a non-ministerial department, that means that in particular operational decisions, day-to-day operational decisions about taxpayers' cases are taken by HMRC officials and not by ministers. But we, at a sort of strategic level, we do operate under the direction of ministers. So our strategies and our plans and our resources and budgets and targets are all agreed with ministers.
So ministers own that strategic journey that you've just taken us through. Can I then ask, from an operational point of view, if you're a non-ministerial department, was it an operational decision that you took to switch your helpline off on the 19th of March that was not shown to ministers?
No, that's not the case. HMRC decided that we that we thought it was a good idea to do this based on the results of the trials last year, but that was shared with ministers.
They knew the date.
Yes.
They knew you were planning to do this on the 19th of March. Who were these stakeholders then who caused you to reverse the decision on the 20th of March?
So, we got an immediate reaction from a range of stakeholders, including tax professional bodies that expressed concern that despite the trials last year and despite the evaluations of those, that we were moving too fast. And that they did not have the assurance they needed that we would be able to provide services, for example, to those customers who could not do things online. And we concluded that the best thing to do would be to stop the changes that we had announced. And
had you not run this by your external stakeholders before the 19th of March?
Yes, we had spoken to stakeholders, in particular sort of tax professional groups. We knew that they would have preferred us not to proceed with it. Frankly, they would prefer us not to make these significant changes at all, but to be resourced to do things in the way that we've always done them. So we knew that they were not going to welcome the changes, but we believed that we had done the work to demonstrate that we could safely implement them.
Who were the new stakeholders that you suddenly heard from after your announcement on the 19th of March?
Well, it was a range of stakeholders, including parliamentarians and including the professional groups. But they were, we had already engaged, for example, with this committee. We'd written to you with the interim evaluation of the summer pilot the previous year. So, we felt that we were engaging with our stakeholders and explaining and giving evidence for why we could safely do this.
So the parliamentarians you heard from were not the Treasury Select Committee? The
No.
new stakeholders that you heard from that suddenly made you reverse your decision wasn't the Treasury Select Committee. Who were these parliamentarians that suddenly popped up and got you to reverse your decision?
So I'm not saying there were new stakeholders who came out of the woodwork. I mean, we have got parliamentarians are our stakeholders because it's your constituents, obviously, that we serve, and in addition, the tax professional bodies.
The new stakeholders. Who did you hear from in that 24-hour period that made you reverse your decision?
I'm not sure that we have said that there were new stakeholders. I mean, what there was a strength of feeling from stakeholders, which was not what we had been expecting, and which expressed concerns about matters that I believed we will be able to demonstrate to stakeholders that we have taken account of, but that we need to work through because we recognise.
Your strategy is still to do this.
Certainly, our strategy is still a digital-first strategy, but we are not proceeding with the 3 changes that we announced on the 19th of March because of the strength of concerns expressed by stakeholders. What we have said that we will do is we will engage with stakeholders further on how we can safely implement our digital-first strategy, and that may mean doing it more slowly than we had originally planned. I
don't think the concerned stakeholders are going to feel very different in terms of their concerns, are they, at any time on this journey?
Well, I think, first of all, a lesson for us is that we did an extensive evaluation of the 2 trials, but we only published that on the 19th of March, so people externally had not had the opportunity to absorb that in the same way as we had and ministers had. So I think we need to go through all of the concerns that stakeholders have, all of the evidence for whether those concerns are justified or not, and our plans for how we will address them. In the meantime, we will undoubtedly be implementing our strategy more slowly than we said we would on the 19th of March.
Jayne-Anne, what role did the board play in this screeching U-turn? How much of this concern from stakeholders came from the board, and who did you hear from that was new to you between the 19th and the 20th of March?
So from a board perspective, we had reviewed the test that Angela's talked about and found those results to be strong. We knew and were very supportive of the fact that this strategy would be developed for this year for all sorts of reasons, actually providing the vast majority of taxpayers with a better service through digital capability. We weren't aware that the 19th of March was the absolute date for that to go live, but we knew it would be around about then. And we heard about the change of heart after that had happened as a board.
So you didn't cause the change of heart?
We did not, no.
Who did you hear the change of heart from?
From Jim.
Okay. And he communicated to you by saying...
Well, I think what had happened was the notice of the change of heart was in the newspapers, and Jim and I spoke after that and talked about the fact that this was now something that we were calling to a halt to review further because of the amount of comment that had been made. But no, the board didn't hear directly from different stakeholders.
You'll forgive me, I'm just trying to get to the bottom, Jim, of who this concerned set of stakeholders were that you hadn't heard from in the run-up to the 19th of March, that you suddenly heard from, that caused you to make this screeching U-turn? I
don't believe there are significant groups of stakeholders that we hadn't heard from or who were new. I think what we heard was a strength of feeling from our stakeholders, which was a strength of concern which was greater than we had expected, and which we felt we needed to acknowledge and look into, which and that's why we decided that we should not proceed with the changes until we had done that.
And it wasn't the board we just heard? No.
No.
Okay. So was it the Chancellor?
It was, yes, ministers certainly conveyed their concerns.
Prime Minister?
Well, ministers, I spoke to my minister, my departmental minister, but ministers certainly expressed their concern about the strength of the reaction and about the fact that the reaction was not just wasn't a political reaction, it was actually a genuine concern about how is this all going to work. And we quickly agreed that the right thing to do is not to proceed with this and to listen to these concerns and to make sure that we have either addressed them, or if we haven't, that we take them on board and replan. And so that's why we decided not to proceed.
But you are proceeding with your strategic journey that you've outlined.
So we're continuing to invest heavily in our digital services. We are continuing to encourage customers to use them as their first port of call if they possibly can. But what we're not doing is proceeding with the 3 changes to our helpline services that we announced on the 19th of March. So those helplines will remain open in the usual way.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Jim Harra, just to continue with this, you've told us that you concede that you were moving too fast, that you're now not proceeding with these changes, and yet previously you've told us, and I'll quote, "We need a higher proportion of customers to self-serve online using our rated online services if we are to deliver our service standards for those customers who need to phone or write to us with the resources available to us." So now that you've halted these proposed changes, what does that mean for current ongoing service delivery?
Yes, so if I can first of all just describe the sort of strategic pressure that we're under, which led to the choices that we have made. We have a situation where our customer base is growing through a combination of factors, and the underlying contact demand from that customer base is growing. And we have got diminishing resources to deal with it. So over the Spending Review 2021 period, from the 1st of April 2022 till the end of the current financial year, we expect to have to reduce the size of our customer service group by about 5,000 staff.
And where will the effects of not implementing the changes announced on the 19th of March be felt?
So
where are the pressure points?
Yeah, so the key pressure point is in our helpline service, where we are giving a service to customers well below the service standard that we want to give them, whether that be the wait times or whether that be the proportion of calls that succeed in getting answered by an advisor. And today, a lower proportion of those calls is being answered than would have been the case if we'd been able to implement these changes, because customers who we would have deflected to the online services are today going through to those helplines. So what we've now got to do, given that we are not proceeding with those changes, is to replan what we can do to push our service levels up as high as we can.
You didn't have a backup plan scoped out for the changes that you made, the U-turn you made on the 19th of March, is that correct?
Frankly, there really only is one alternative plan, and that is to deploy more helpline resources. We currently do not have the funding to do that, but we are, of course, in discussions with ministers following the decision on the 20th of March not to go ahead with these changes about what we will do.
On those discussions with ministers that you talked about and stakeholders, did you make the point that you would now require additional resources?
Yes, so we've been discussing with ministers, our plans to produce the best level of service that we can now that we are not proceeding with the changes announced on the 19th of March, and those discussions are very constructive, but they are.
What is the actual response, though? You said they've been constructive, so what does that mean? Are you getting additional resources? Have there been promises made? What's happening?
I believe the response will have to be that we deploy additional resources on our helplines. The question is whether that involves reprioritising what the department does, so reprioritising from something else, or whether we can get additional funding for that additional resource. And that's what we're in discussion with ministers about.
And have you been given any indication that you'll get that additional funding you just mentioned?
So the discussions with ministers have been very positive and constructive. They completely understand the situation that we are in. However, they are ongoing as things stand. I don't have any
No promises have been made, no commitments have been made. So at the moment, you're still having to cope with this situation. Is that right?
I am proceeding on the assumption. So I'm making preparations on the assumption that I will be able to deploy additional resources, whether that comes with additional funding or whether it comes from reprioritising, because there is a lead in time for recruiting and training and deploying additional helpline advisors, so I need to be getting on with that. In the interim, the service performance continues to be under considerable pressure.
Okay, and if you get that additional resource, where might the extra resources be most effective to improve customer service?
Well, the main pressure
in the near future, I mean.
Yeah, in the short term, the main pressure is on our helplines. So if you look at our customer correspondence dealing with repayment claims and letters and everything, we have made significant improvements in our performance on that over the course of 23-24 and in the previous year as well. So we are bumping along just slightly below our service standard, but we don't have significant backlogs of that work. But the main pressure is on wait times and advisor attempts handled on the helplines.
If you don't get the resources, what's the effect?
So I believe that I will have to plan to deploy additional resources. If I don't get additional funding, then I will have to look at whether I need to reprioritise something else.
Okay, it's just on that subject of reprioritising. It's been reported that ministers have not been sufficiently assured that there are relevant safeguards in place for the transition to digital and want to see a greater focus on improving performance before any decisions are taken on additional support. Have ministers had that discussion with you?
Yes, so I think the decision on the 20th of March reflects the fact that having heard stakeholders' reaction, ministers want more assurance that we can successfully implement the digital first strategy whilst making sure that those customers who do need to deal with HMRC have got the ability to do so.
Okay, so you're in a catch-22 situation. How is it possible for you to move forward if you have to give these safeguards before you can give safeguards to get additional resources?
Well, I think we will be engaging with stakeholders to understand more about their concerns, to see if we can demonstrate to them that we have addressed them. But I think, inevitably in the short term, we are going to be implementing this strategy on a slower track and more reliant on marketing our services and persuading customers and informing them to encourage them to try online first. And we've done extensive research with customers to understand what's involved in doing that. So we will still be able to make progress, but not at the rate that we would need based on current resources and current forecast demand.
One final question, and based on what you've just said and the fact that there is this remaining uncertainty over performance and getting the resources, are you worried that things are actually going to get worse in the near future?
Certainly in the short term, I think we are in for a very difficult first quarter. I would hope that going into the second quarter that we will be able to make improvements with additional resources, as well as continuing to push our digital first strategy at every opportunity. But it takes, if the solution to this in the short term is to deploy more resources, it takes time to recruit them and train them and deploy them effectively.
Very concerning for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. Angela.
So essentially, because of this screeching U-turn, you're expecting customer service levels to go down in the short term?
I think there's little doubt that if we had been able to proceed, the evidence from last year's trials indicates that we would have been able to help more vulnerable and digitally excluded customers, because the route through to an advisor for them would not have been blocked by other callers whose calls could have been effectively dealt with online. And I just give you one example. We receive 11 to 12 million calls a year on our pay-as-you-earn helpline. About 5% of those are from people who are progress chasing on a repayment claim. If they wait and get through to an advisor, the advisor goes on to a tool which tells them when they will get a response. That tool is online. They can go on and check that themselves. Our plan for announced on the 19th of March had been not to take those calls, but to direct all of those callers to the online tool. But having not proceeded with that, a significant number of those people will now still be ringing the helpline and will be taking up advisor time that could have been used to help a vulnerable customer or a customer who really needed to speak to someone. So that will be the short-term impact.
So you've essentially been knocked off what your plans were by the adverse reaction to your announcements about the 19th, and now you're scrabbling round to try to see what you can rescue from the mess that's being created. We
haven't been knocked off our strategy, but we have certainly been knocked off the course, the implementation course for it, where we had been intending to push the pace as hard as we could, because we know the gap between our demand and our available resources is growing. We now have to replan, but there will be a short-term impact as I've described.
And you were saying earlier that essentially that your customer base is growing, but you've had to accept cuts in resources as part of presumably the settlement that the Treasury came to about HMRC in the last spending review and the ongoing spending reviews. Your customer base is growing for a few reasons. Is one of them the freezing of tax thresholds?
There are a combination of reasons. So policy decisions like thresholds bring more people into the tax system. That combines with inflation and wage growth, also sort of bringing people over thresholds. So that is a key reason. The Office of Budget. Is it
the most important reason?
It's certainly a significant one in terms of the growth of the customer base. It's also the case that a growing proportion of a growing number of our customers are moving into more complex ends of the tax system, where they are more likely to want to contact us, and in some cases, they will need to do so, and we need to free up our resources so that we can deal with those people.
So thresholds one. What about child benefit charges that essentially one can sort of earn one's way out of being entitled to child benefit? When you earn so much, that brings people into a complex situation as well, doesn't it?
Yes, but the Chancellor's...
And this is speeded up because inflation is pushing people's wages up faster.
The Chancellor's recent announcement about actually increasing the thresholds when that comes in actually helps us, because it reduces the number of people who will be within that charge. So to the extent that those people have to deal with HMRC, they are actually being removed. So, there are swings and roundabouts, but overall, there is growth, but not on that.
Okay, so the tax thresholds is a big one. What are the next biggest ones that are growing your...
The main causes for pressure on our resources. So first of all, I've mentioned that growth in customer demand through inflation and wage growth, increases in interest rates push more people who've got investment income into tax as well. So that's the reason for the customer base growth. Then, in addition, the cost savings pressure on the department has grown as well. So when we settled the spending review in 2021, that assumed that we would have to make £500 million a year annual savings by the end of the spending review period. But some of those pressures on our own costs, like inflation, have actually pushed that target up to about 770 million. So whilst we were on track to deliver the original 500 million, there is a gap at the moment in delivering the 770, which is reflecting in the customer service that we can offer.
And there's no spending review where you can make arguments about these kinds of pressures until after the election?
Well, there's a main estimates and a supplementary estimates process every year, and we are, as I said, in discussions with ministers following the change announced on the 20th of March about how we replan to give a better customer service this year without making the kinds of changes that we announced on the 19th. So there are opportunities. We certainly don't have to wait till the next spending review to have those kinds of discussions.
I think some of the most frustrating times any one of my constituents has in dealing with organisations is the digital access into them, where one ends up either on the phone listening to inane music or trying to have a chat box conversation online and not being able to talk to a human being, which when one's trying to check a bill or something might be just about standable. But can you see why people may wish to speak to a human being when they're talking about their tax returns? Because if they get it wrong, they may have to pay fines or get into difficulty and trouble, and it's a more complex thing quite often than one's average sort of attempts to deal with other services digitally.
Yes, so we've done some research which we published about our customers' attitudes to dealing with us online. A positive thing from that, a positive finding from that is that 86% of our customers are willing to deal with us online. But the research also showed that complexity is a key driver for them not to want to deal with us online, but to want to deal with us personally. So obviously, the more we can simplify processes for customers, the more likely they are to willingly adopt online services. And then secondly, our research showed a very high need amongst customers of HMRC for reassurance. That what they are doing is that they're getting it right, and that
I mean, this isn't a surprise.
No, it's not. It's not a surprise, but it obviously needs to be reflected in how we design our online services. And so for example, our online services need to be reassuring people as we go along to keep them in the digital journey. But also, it's a key driver for simplifying the tax system for people as well, because we know that just adding a little bit of complexity will cause customers to prefer to deal with us, on the phone or by correspondence.
To be fair, I mean, it's not in your bivouac to simplify the tax system. You've got to get people to respond and put in their tax returns or deal with you in all of these areas, be it VAT, PAYE or self-assessment, regardless of how complex the tax system is. That implies a much more bespoke, reassuring system than would be normal. Are you designing bespoke systems which by their definition are going to be more expensive and harder to maintain?
So, well, first of all, I'll work backwards on that. I cannot design a concierge service for 45 million taxpayers.
Right, unsurprisingly.
It's got to be a self-serve system as much as we can possibly make it. In terms of simplification, first of all, there are things that HMRC can do ourselves to try and make things as simple for people and to reassure them. I mean, for example, one of the main causes of calls to the Pay-As-You-Earn helpline is from people who do not understand their Pay-As-You-Earn tax code, which is unsurprising, and if they've got more than one source of income, don't understand how their tax-free personal allowance has been allocated among them. So we are working on producing an online sort of tool that makes that clearer for people and simplifies their ability to understand their code. But beyond that, we are part of the policy partnership that advises ministers on tax policy, and they have, the Chancellor has given us an explicit remit to advise on simplification, and at both the autumn statement last autumn and at the spring budget this year, he has introduced a package of measures to simplify the tax system, as well as a set of metrics for how we're going to measure simplification going forward. So I think ministers, are fully aware that the simpler the tax system, the simpler the task of administering it, and therefore the more savings you can make. But of course there are trade-offs in that all the time.
Were you surprised at the suddenness and the fierceness of the response on the 19th of March?
So I wasn't surprised that stakeholders didn't welcome the changes. I was disappointed that despite the work that we had done the previous year, that there was so much concern and doubt about whether they would work and whether we would be able to support customers effectively during it, because I believe the evidence demonstrates that we can. But we're a public service, and we have to recognise that that it's not just us who sets the pace, others do as well. Now customers need to have the confidence that they will be properly supported, and that's why we are going back to reflect on that.
Looking back, what do you think you did wrong?
Yes, so I think first of all, we did not give enough time when we published the evaluation to actually take our stakeholders through it and explain the evidence. So whilst we published a detailed evaluation on the same day, we announced what we were going to do as a result of it. And frankly, I think some of the speed of the stakeholder reaction indicates that they did not have the time to digest the evaluation that we had published. So I think, for the department, we have to reflect on not just the pace at which we want to move, but at how effectively we are engaging with stakeholders and explaining and informing.
Are you sure you weren't just doing this to try and make the case for more resources? Because I'm sort of hearing a bit of that too. But Stephen.
Good afternoon, and thank you for coming to give evidence. Can I continue where Dame Andrew has just finished then? You said you need to engage more carefully with stakeholders, I think. Do you think you should have taken more sounding? Do you think you should have taken more time to take people through the changes?
Yes.
And what would you do differently in the future?
Before I answer that, obviously, just to pick up the Chair's comments, I fully believe in our strategy. When we had our spending review in 2021, I signed up to the spending review on the basis that we would be able to deliver the savings in it through implementation of this strategy. I want us to continue implementing the strategy as fast as we can. So that's definitely not, there's nothing tactical involved in this at all from my point of view. In fact, I'm very disappointed that we have not been able to take what I regard as a modernising step at this point. But I think, yes, I think, building on what I said before, there are certainly lessons for the department in how we engage with stakeholders. If we had taken, I believe that if we had taken more time to go through the results of the evaluation of last year's trials and to explain how we were going to make sure that vulnerable customers or digitally excluded customers could get through to advisor, and indeed more get through than would otherwise be the case, and the fact that our digital journey has got an HMRC advisor at the end of it on web chat to speak to, not a chat bot, an actual person, then maybe that would have assuaged some of the concerns. But it is also the case that some of our stakeholders, they are quite modernisation of HMRC is not always in their immediate interests, and I think sometimes we will have to make decisions in the face of disagreement with our stakeholders and be prepared to do that.
I think in response to one of the other questions, you said also some of the stakeholders had concerns about whether or not the online system would completely work, and yet in the letter to our chair on the 19th of March this year, you described highly rated online services. How do you explain the difference between your perception of your services being highly rated online and acknowledging the concern that some people, stakeholders, significant stakeholders, were concerned about the viability of your online service?
So, Angela can give you more details about what we've been doing with our digital services. We have been investing heavily in them. We are seeing very considerable growth in the use of them. For example, a 250,000 uses of our mobile app last year, which was up from 200 million the year before, and we see very good customer satisfaction levels with them, much higher than our helpline service. And in addition, I think a couple of things that didn't cut through in our messaging really. One was that vulnerable customers and digitally excluded people would not have to try to use the services. And the second was that even people who were using them, if the service didn't meet their needs, there is an HMRC advisor at the end of the digital journey on web chat who can help. So I am confident that whilst we need to continue enhancing the services and expanding them all the time, they are very good quality. They can deal with a significant number of customers' queries and kind of filter out the ones that we don't need to deal with an advisor.
The words highly rated referred to customer satisfaction.
Yes.
Okay. Can I just be clear, because several times you have said that you're not going to proceed with the changes that were due to be implemented on the 19th of March. Just for the record, so I'm absolutely clear, does that mean they are now cancelled? Does it mean that you are going to take further consultation and bring them back later? Or are you just waiting to sneak them back in, say, back in October?
So they are cancelled. October, we would certainly not have wanted to be introducing a closure of the self-assessment helpline. On the contrary, the proposal was to bring it back online at that point because that is the peak period of the year. So I'm not saying we will not return to this because it is part of implementing our strategy. We do think it was effective last year, but we're not just pausing to try again. We have stopped those changes, and we will reflect with stakeholders, and we will replan the implementation of our strategy, and that may or may not include this type of measure in the future.
So, thank you. So, notwithstanding you have a digital first strategy, in response to one of Mr. Hendry's questions, you talked about a significant performance in a significant improvement in service levels, and yet we see a report recently that suggests that if you're using a PAYE phone or a self-assessment helpline phone, you've now got record waiting levels. How do you marry the two comments?
Yes, that is our key problem, and it's very regrettable, and I'm sorry for the experience that our customers get, but we have got very high wait times on some of our helplines. For example, on self-assessment during the peak, I think it was about 38 minutes on average that people had to wait to get through to us, which is far, far too long. There are really only two ways of addressing that. Either we reduce the demand on the helpline by deflecting demand online where it can be adequately dealt with online, or we increase the resources on the helpline to meet that demand.
In terms of resources, how many of your staff at the moment are working from home and could be deployed to improve wait lines?
So we have a policy. So we are an office-based organisation. We have a policy that we expect colleagues to come into the office most of the time. We have, on the last statistics I saw, more than 95% of colleagues came into the office last month, for example. The standard that we have is that you should come in at least 60% of the time. The majority of colleagues meet that standard.
Is that a standard across the whole operation, or is that in different offices? Because you'll be aware of the report that we have seen in the Telegraph. I don't know whether it's accurate. You'll tell me whether it's accurate at the moment. That at your head offices, only 54% of the staff were in on an average in January, February, March.
Yeah. So I can tell you that's inaccurate. But yes, so we have a general policy. If looking at helpline advisors, so helpline advisors are expected to work in the office most of their time, but they are able to work from home if they wish to do so, and if they're able to perform their duties satisfactorily at home. We know that we are able to monitor from our telephony system when our advisors are online, how many calls they're dealing with. There is no difference between the number of calls that a helpline advisor deals with on a day, depending on whether they're at home or in the office. We get the same level of productivity. Nevertheless, we see value in colleagues being in the office because they learn together and they collaborate. And so helpline advisors, even though an experienced advisor can be as productive at home as they are in the office, we still expect them to go into the office most of the time.
Most of the time is 60%, is that right?
Yes, so for a full-time officer, we expect them to go in at least 3 days a week.
And at the other times they're working from home and they have the facilities to answer helpline queries from home?
Yes, so all of our systems are available remotely as well as in the office, so there's no difference to the telephony and systems that our helpline advisors can use. We are able to monitor their performance, whether they're online, and the number of calls they handle in exactly the same way. There's not an absolute right for people to work from home. You have to have adequate facilities at home to do so, and you have to demonstrate that you can perform your duties at home. But our monitoring tells us that for our helpline staff, our web chat advisors, and also staff on our post teams, they are as effective at home as they are in the office. So I'm confident, whilst I want to make sure that colleagues comply with our working from home policy, I'm confident that an answer to our problem is not to change the balance between working from home and office.
So you're confident that the resource level that would not change or alter your resource problem. Can I, in terms of obviously as a committee, but also as a member of Parliament, I get a number of correspondence about your services, and there are frequent reports about how long it's taking to reply to postal correspondence now, which is, I accept it's not the primary part of your strategy. What's the sort of the average length to respond to postal queries at the moment?
So we have, I'll let Angela give you the precise details. We've got 2 service standards, how much post is answered within 15 working days, how much is answered within 40 working days. We aim to answer 80% within 15 working days. I believe we're currently about 75%.
Yeah, 75%. So we get about 20 million items of post a year. We 75% is what we're expecting our outturn to be in 23-24. That's replies in 15 working days. That is the best performance in 4 years. We have been gradually improving our performance. What's really important and why it's so important to focus on that is because if you get behind on your post, a chunk of those phone calls are people chasing you, trying to find out where their items are, and therefore staying on top of that becomes incredibly important. There are a number of areas where actually we've sought to take the post approach out altogether. If we take child benefit as a good example, we introduced a new totally digital child benefit service last year, which has moved from a very manual post, takes you at least 19 working days to get an answer, to a fully digital service where people are getting money in their bank accounts in 3 days. So it isn't just about how fast we process post, it's also about how we seek to provide alternatives that our customers would expect. But yes, absolutely, we are just about at service standard at that 80%, and it is the best it has been in 4 years.
And is that across the whole range of people coming to you, or is it one particular area? And for instance, one gets an awful lot of remarks about comments from constituents about how long it's taking to respond to self-assessment queries.
That is the picture across everything. The amount obviously moves at varying times of the year because dependent upon the tax, there are rises and falls in the processes, which means we get more or less of a particular topic depending upon deadlines or filing. So at any one point in time, but yes, that's the average across the entire position. And in some instances, actually, we are significantly outperforming our service. If I give you an incredibly important area, which is VAT registration for businesses, our service standard for that is 40 days. We're actually currently running at 20 days for VAT registration because we just know how vital that is. So, the challenge obviously is in the averages, there are ups and downs, but where we know...
You can see where there are particular areas, I take the point about the average, but where there are particular areas where I seem to get more comments about how slow it is to respond.
Yeah, I think a particular area of challenge can often be repayments, when people want self-assessment repayments back. Again, we are for standard repayments where we have no concerns. Actually, those repayments are pretty much going through to that average number that I quote. We do, where we see a repayment which looks perhaps unusual, we will refer that for risking. And those cases definitely take longer, where we seek to ask significantly more questions of the customer. And certainly I'm at the other end of the correspondence that you might send in, and often the complaints about length will be on cases where we have sought to do more compliance checking than normal. But again, that's on average. Things can move around during the year.
Thank you. Rez.
How many people fill in a tax return every year?
It's about 12 million in self-assessment.
About 12 million. So you've just told us that you've had 11 to 12 million calls on a helpline. So that's average, under one.
So on all our helplines, we get about 38 million calls a year. There were about 11 million calls in 22-23 on the pay-as-you-earn helpline, and it was probably going to come out. I haven't got the final figures for 23-24, but it's probably more than that. It's probably about 12 million.
So 12 million people who were asked to fill in a tax return, how many contacted you in the last tax year?
So calls to our self-assessment helpline, I think it's roughly about one call for every two taxpayers.
So half of people have to contact you in some way.
Yes, and that is too high. Some of those calls will be necessary, because the person has a query where they need a piece of information or a piece of advice before they complete their return. Many of them are from people who go to log on and realise they've forgotten their password or whatever, and they ring us to help them get online. But yes, that's the volume. So
can I just clarify, the 20 million items of post, is that in addition to the 38 million?
Yes.
And will the people working, how many people work on this helpline, whether it's through post or on the phone, web chat?
So there are about in the customer service group there are about 19,600 staff altogether. They are doing the helplines, doing post. They are clearing work items that the computer systems generate, and that also includes our debt management service.
Okay, so of their time, given that tax debt is now at a significant record high, I'm just trying to work out how you assess your productivity.
So at an individual level, we know how many calls a helpline advisor should be able to handle in a day. We know how many pieces of post someone working on the post team should be able to clear in a day on average. There'll be days when they're different. So that's how we measure people's productivity. In the case of calls, we're sort of constantly re-evaluating that, because as we implement our strategy, what should happen is that the simpler calls get dealt with by our online services, and the more complex calls go through to our helpline advisors. So we do expect our call handling times per call to grow, even though the number of calls will reduce. So we have to keep re-evaluating that, but that's our key way of measuring people's productivity.
In terms of measuring the people working from home or wherever they work, you've told us about the quantitative comparison. What's the qualitative difference?
Yeah, so we do quite extensive quality measurement across. Those will be sample cases. There are two tiers of that. Firstly, your line manager will be looking at a sample of your cases, and then we also have a completely independent second tier who will do statistical dips into individual cases. And there is, again, the main difference actually isn't your location of where you're doing it. The main difference will be, as you would expect, people who are newer or have less experience, you would absolutely expect, and we provide them additional support. We see some mistakes made by newer people, which is not at all a surprise. And therefore we will, in any team, a team is typically 12, 14 people. A team leader will usually have a mix of really experienced people and newer people in order to be able to manage that through.
So of your most experienced people, how many of them are in the office more than 3 days, at least 3 days a week?
There is no different requirement, except when there is training, for instance. So when we have new people, you could absolutely be expected to be in 5 days over a long period of time because you're going through new training, or as a more experienced person, you are offering training to that new person. So it will be, it comes back to what Jim said earlier. You know, we do have an overarching organisational rule, but that policy, but that does not mean that what we do that in an unthinking way. We will.
How many of what proportion of your team in the last 12 months have come in for at least 60% of the time? There's no point in just saying 95% came in last month. They might have come in for an hour for a meeting. That would be classified as coming in. So how many people are being in the office at least 3 days a week?
So that has been growing over the course of time. By the end of the last financial year, I think it was something like 57% of colleagues were meeting our expectations about the amount of time they spend in the office.
What is it today?
Well, I mean, that was just...
When you're at the end of the last financial year, do you mean the end of March?
End of March, yeah.
What was it at the end of March last year?
I think it was 57% of colleagues were meeting our expectation.
In March 23?
Sorry, in March 24.
What was it in March 23?
I'm not sure I have that number to hand, but it has been. It
so
has
increased
over the course of the year.
One of the things that I'm asking for is simply because HMRC staff have had considerably higher pay rises than the rest of the civil service on the basis of productivity. I'm hearing you say earlier, you've now got half of people filling in a tax return still don't think, obviously, your website is sufficiently good to not resort to post or using the phone or anything like that. And yet, it's not that many years ago, you signed to these extensive leases for buildings. I know during lockdown, I went and saw yours, there was not a single person in quite a lot of your offices. Not a single person. And I'm just trying to get an understanding, because at the moment I understand, and I'd be interested to hear from Dame Jayne-Anne, I mean, the amount of money that HMRC themselves spent on offices, continue to spend, and you're now actually having to get the rest of the government to bail you out by coming to share your very flash premises, frankly.
There's actually several gross distortions in what you have said.
I'm saying this as a former Secretary of State. I know what was...
You may do, but I'm afraid I have to correct them one by one.
How many floors of the 7 floors that you took on in Belfast, how many today does HMRC occupy? And what is your occupancy rate in Belfast? I'm really pushing this at the board on how they are holding, because on one hand you're saying you want more money, and on the other hand, it feels to me there's a lot of money that hasn't necessarily been spent wisely in the past. And at the moment, it's only because of reaction to ministers, even though you're a non-ministerial department, that you've, in a way, been more responsive to customers. So that's my frustration, Mr. Harra. And I think
you can start and then I'll...
So I think inevitably it's always easy to look at some of the problems. Let's not forget that HMRC are collecting nearly £800 billion worth of tax a year, and that over 80% of customers are very satisfied with service. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the first thing that we should really put on record. I think the second thing is that in terms of the property strategy, the merging of a huge variety of different buildings into individual premises that are now much reduced in number was clearly strategically a very sensible thing to do for a whole variety of reasons. You know, the buildings are more efficient, they're greener, overall the cost of the premises, I think, makes sense. At the same time, people are coming into HMRC are obviously people that can be attracted to jobs elsewhere. And so making sure that there's an overall competition, if you like, and where HMRC is attractive is really important. And as a board, to your point, you know, we've discussed, I think at every board meeting, where people are working from home, their levels of productivity and the way in which people are expected to come in. And so we're seeing that improve, to your earlier point, month on month. And actually that property strategy, even before COVID and even before the conversations that we're having now, for the vast majority of people, I think, only expected that they would be coming in for 3 days a week. Otherwise, there simply isn't enough property for the people that need to be dealing with customers. And so we're really, as a board, of course, there are really important things that need to be addressed. But I still think that it's really important to realise that HMRC collects nearly £800 billion worth of tax. The tax gap is very small. Debt has been increasing, as you pointed out earlier, but there's a huge focus on that. The development of staff and the employment of staff are absolutely at the forefront of everyone's mind. And developing projects that improve digital strategy is only going to make that more efficient. So of course there are all sorts of areas, and you're addressing them, that need to be improved. But I also agree that in terms of the fundamentals of HMRC's strategy and execution, as a board we believe that there's some very good points to celebrate. But I should ask Jim to...
Well, just to pick up some specific things. I mean, first of all, on the pay of our staff, I am this month having to give nearly a third of my staff, including all of the helpline advisors and the staff who work in the post teams, a rise so that they can stay with the national living wage. So that is the rate of pay that I am giving those colleagues, which is not a position that I want to be in, but just in case people were left with the false impression that we are paying people very high salaries. That's not the case. In terms of our locations, we have made very significant savings since 2015 with our new location strategy, and have also been building government hubs on behalf of government. So we have been able not only to make those savings as we got out of our old offices, so we've moved from 170 offices in 2015 down to 13 regional centres today, but we've also been able to sublet 84,000 square metres of property to other government departments and other tenants. We are committed to making sure that our use of our estate is efficient. The building that I have with the lowest occupancy is the headquarters building that Mr. Hammond referred to earlier, where the figure that you quoted is not for the proportion of staff coming in, but for the proportion of the estate that is being utilised. It was last month about 65%. I need that to be higher. I want that to be 80 to 85%, and we are restacking that building in June and giving up surplus accommodation so that we can do that. So I am, is my department 100% as efficient as it possibly could be? I don't believe any organisation is, but we know that colleagues answering phone calls at home have the same productivity as colleagues answering in the office. Whilst we are continuing to implement our office working attendance strategy, that is not going to make a material difference in the short term to performance of our helplines, and I believe that we have made really big savings and are very efficient in the use of our estate.
So I'd be really grateful if you could write to us with the occupancy of each of your buildings, and using this as an example about how money gets spent within government. And it was in 2017 when you had to increase the pay of your AAs to match the national living wage. So it is slightly disappointing to hear that's to happen again. So I'm not criticising pay. What I'm flagging is that compared to the rest of the civil service, in return for productivity increases that were expected, I think ministers agreed a sign-off of a higher than other civil servants in return for that. And it just concerns me now that you're saying, oh, well, we won't be able to achieve that because of X, Y, Z. Right. But I want to pursue a particular thing. So there are plenty of people who, and I'm not getting into some ridiculous politics about MPs' tax returns or the rest of it, but there are people who you then chase having issued tax rebates. And I'm going to use the example of people who went to advice of Apostle Accounting in Suffolk. They're now being chased for that. Meanwhile, the person's firm liquidated, they've got another accountancy and tax firm being done. So what are you doing to go after the advisors? Because at the moment, I think the fear is people are turning to other advisors rather than HMRC, and ultimately is their thing on what they put in their tax return, is their whatever. But when people are making what they consider to be honest mistakes, do you not feel that by being more attuned to the ear of people wanting advice rather than going after these, what are you doing to close down the cowboy tax advisors? Yeah. But what are you doing to make sure that people can get the best advice they can from gov.uk and stuff like that? Because at the moment, it suggests it's not working if half of people filling in a tax return are still contacting you.
That's the
point I want to make.
There are about 43,000 professional tax advisory firms in the country. Most of them are doing a good job for their clients and a good job for the tax system, but a significant minority are not. Whilst it is the taxpayer's responsibility to choose their agent wisely and know what their agent is doing on their own behalf, we also want to make sure that we do not allow rogue agents to operate in the tax system. There's been a particular issue in recent years with what we call repayment agents who market, mass market to people the ability to make relatively small repayment claims, when in fact most of those are relatively straightforward to make, and we've been building the best possible self-service options for customers so that they do not feel the need to use those agents unless they really want to. But we've also, and the government has taken measures to help us to change that market. So, for example, one of the practices of those repayment agents was getting their clients to assign the right to the repayment to the agent, so that we had no alternative in law but to pay the money to the agent. That has now been abolished, and whilst customers can still nominate their agent to receive their repayment on their behalf, that's now at our discretion, and we will not do that where we are not satisfied with the agent standards, and that is pretty damaging to the business model of those agents if they get into that position. So
are you pursuing people to be struck off?
Yes. So, well, yes.
Could you let us know how many you've done that for?
Okay,
thanks.
Sorry, if I can just say, we can report agents to their professional bodies for misconduct, but there is no requirement in this country for a tax agent to be a member of such a body. So there are
You're consulting on
agents,
some
which
changes
we are
in this area.
on.
So, Danny. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. A couple of questions first about the vulnerable customers you've got, and I appreciate what you've been saying about the helplines and so on. Can you just say a little bit more about how you classify vulnerable customers and how you are confident that with the changes that are underway, you'll continue to be able to provide them with the service that they need?
Yeah, so we believe a very small proportion of customers, because of their health or personal circumstances, are vulnerable in the sense that they cannot deal with their tax affairs and deal with HMRC in the usual way. For some of them, that might be an enduring characteristic. For others, it is, at a particular point in time, they may be vulnerable, but not always. We rely on them alerting us, but we also train our advisors to try and identify them, and we have got an extra support service so first of all, most of our advisors are trained, they're able to help vulnerable customers if they need help, but for the particularly vulnerable, we have a needs extra support service that they can be referred to. And one of the tests during the pilot last year, when we temporarily closed the self-assessment helpline, was whether we could catch those people and refer them, and in fact we increased the referral rates through to the needs extra support team during that period.
So what I've got here, I'm not sure of the time frame of this and whether it was during that period, but the helplines trials that you did, you haven't had an assessment. It says 26,000 calls transferred to the extra support team, more than 3 times the number of calls prior to the trial. 88% were handled by an advisor. What was the other 12%? What happened to the other 12%? Who looked after them, and why didn't they make it through to an advisor? Do you know?
So that would have been a 12% that didn't, where the call did not get picked up. So those people would have had to have called back. So,
sorry, I'm not following the process. Just talk me through what happens if I call in, and how am I transferred to the extra support team, and why wouldn't I be?
So during the trial period, anyone who rang the self-assessment helpline got an automated message which said, this helpline is closed, you're ringing about query X, we're SMSing you a link to the website that gives you the advice you need on that. But if you are unable to use our online services or you need special assistance, here's a number that you can ring that where you will be dealt with. And so that was a sort of triage. When we saw a big increase in people ringing that number during that period, which meant there were 26,000 additional referrals. We did not succeed in answering all of them. We answered 88% of them.
I see, okay. And have you got any sense of what did happen to the other 12%? They would have had to call back? Do you think they then would have joined the 88%? Is that the
yes, so I mean,
assumption?
Yes, I mean, what happens is, what normally happens is the caller will call back at another time and get their call answered. So it expands the total number of calls is greater than the number.
Yes, we don't know how many customers is behind that 26,000 calls.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, fine. Okay, all right. Well, thank you for that. Can I come on to the high income child benefit charge and the changes that the Chancellor announced on that? And obviously, there's a very important reform that was proposed. Just firstly, quickly on the raising of the threshold from 50 to 60,000, and then also the tapering of the charge up to 80,000. Is there a process underway for reaching out to and communicating with families who may have been caught by the charge before but won't be now?
Yes, I wonder if I might give you those answers. Yes, so there are different groups of people who manage their way through the child benefit service. So you'll have customers who applied for child benefit but decided not to take payment. You'll have people who apply for child benefit and then pay the charge. Yep. And then you'll have people who decided not to apply for child benefit at all, rather than be in the tax system. So if you think about there's three different approaches that customer groups take. Yep. From the changes take about 170,000 families out of the high income child benefit charge altogether. But what we're trying to do is to make sure that we're focused on those people who were already, two groups. The people who were already registered but weren't taking the payment. Yeah. We launched a new service on the 17th of April to help those customers really easily opt back in. We're only, a week in. We've already seen 1,900 people use that service to opt themselves back in, and another 18,000 have already reactivated their child benefit coming in through the more traditional routes.
How are you communicating with those people?
So we are... there's a variety of ways that we're trying to get in touch with the people who've got live claims. So we're out doing all sorts of social media. We've been going in through things like Mumsnet, Money Saving Expert have been trying to draw people's attention. Right. So we're really trying to go to the places. We've been updating all of the kind of flyers that parents get when they go to hospitals. But we're also getting in touch with the people who we knew, who we believe, who are in that kind of catchment area, to point out to them that this may be they may now be able to take payment. But bearing in mind it's not just the 60,000, there's a taper all the way up to 80, so there's a much larger community. There's about 485,000 families who will be impacted by the change, and our aim is to either draw your attention in to claim child benefit for the first time, the new digital service that I spoke about to Mr. Hammond, or to make it as easy as possible to reactivate your payment. So we're being very active on helping those people.
Do you think the government could be doing more to advertise the change? I mean, we boast about it as a party, but do you think there could be more, or do you think the communication has been clear enough?
Well, I think the communication is pretty straightforward, but as with all things, people lead incredibly busy lives, and I think it's got to be persisting. Yeah. And part of the reason why what the action we've taken to do that is, if you already have a live claim to child benefit, you'll be able to come in up to 2 years from now and still get it backdated to this point. So we're not trying to assume that we can manage to get everybody through in some really quick way. We're kind of going with the fact that people will need time, but as many people as we can, as fast as we possibly can.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's encouraging. Thank you. Can I ask? I'm not sure which of you wants to help with this. Maybe Jim, you initially at least. The change to calculating the child benefit on a household basis is quite a significant alteration in the way HMRC works. Of course, it's the way the benefit system recognises the household, but since the 1990 or so, your work has always been done on an individual basis. How big a change is it, do you think, to try and calculate this particular aspect of your work on a household basis?
If I might carry on with it. Yeah. So obviously the Chancellor announced the desire to make changes. The Chancellor has talked about this being an unfairness between dual income and single income families. The Chancellor is extremely clear that the principle of independent taxation must remain. We will be sharing a consultation very shortly. We'll wait for ministers with the date for that. But it is really important that we understand how we go about this in a way that means that we collect data. We are mindful of the particular risks for vulnerability, for financial abuse. There are some particular concerns, but how do we do that in a way that means that we can be as effective as we can to support everybody? Now, we already collect an awful lot of data. The challenge is how you put those two pieces of data together and what makes up a household. Now, that is an issue which already progresses through things like universal credit. So there are already models to explore there. But the whole purpose of a consultation is to lay out, as you know, what the options are, and then to take as broad a set of feedback as we can to take all views into account, and ministers will progress that in due course.
Well, thank you. That's it's going to be a very interesting exercise, and I don't envy you the challenge involved. But can you confidently say, the change is supposed to come into effect from April 26, I understand. You're confident that no matter what the outcome of the consultation and the options for operationalising it that are chosen, you'll be able to meet that deadline?
I think we will understand how the policy design lays out, and then we will advise ministers what will need to be true in order for us to hit the deadlines that they need us to make. As with all things, these things depend on complexity and challenge and what are the priorities that we have. But if that's the decision that we ministers ask of us, then we will do what we need to do in order to deliver what ministers ask.
Okay.
Sorry,
we're out of time.
Yeah.
I should add, that obviously we do give policy advice to ministers. So the 2026 date was announced, under our advice.
Absolutely.
You're confident of that. Okay. Have I got time for another question, Chair?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. I mean, continuing on the topic. I mean, the danger, as you suggest, is of defining a household and the risk of abuse. But likewise, in order to mitigate that risk, I guess, the necessity of some quite intrusive questions or some quite complex assessments that might be required of individuals and their families. I'm aware, no longer got this former Secretary of State here, but DWP has a 15-page questionnaire that advisors are supposed to use to assess whether a couple are living together as a married couple. It's called the Living Together as a Married Couple assessment. It's 15 pages long of all sorts of questions. It's so much easier if you are just married. But are you concerned about the implications for your staff at having to potentially get quite involved in people's domestic arrangements?
I think these are precisely the things that we will need to understand during the consultation.
Okay, so lastly, I think you might have answered already, but the timing of the consultation you're saying is with ministers, not with you. Is that right?
So
when that will be issued?
We're simply awaiting notification from ministers as to when that consultation will be issued.
All right. Thanks, Danny. John.
Thanks, Chair. Good afternoon. May I raise with you the issue of research and development tax credits? As you know, companies can retrospectively receive a payable tax credit or reduce their tax bill for new or existing projects. And they're designed to support companies that work on cutting-edge projects in an general effort to help make Britain a tech superpower by 2030. Before I go any further, just for clarity, although I believe my companies don't benefit from R&D tax credits, I refer everybody to my entries in the register. Can I put it to you that in an effort to clamp down on fraud and error, there's a general view building that actually, and this is particularly coming from startups and small businesses, that HMRC are putting economic growth and innovation at risk by rejecting legitimate claims for R&D, tax relief, and delaying payments and clawing back tax credits and the time that involves. And there's been various reports in the Financial Times, for example. There's been 9 business leaders who've broken cover and said this is what is happening relatively recently. What is your response to that?
So I think there is a balancing act to be achieved between making sure that R&D credits achieve their policy objectives of promoting innovation and business investment in R&D, which is absolutely what my department is there to ensure that they do, whilst at the same time protecting the exchequer from error and fraud, which has been recently reassessed at an unacceptably high level. So we have got to, as we implement our compliance approach, we've got to listen to all of the feedback and take it on board, and just obviously understand with ministers how we strike that balance. We do plan shortly to release information about our compliance plan, which is to inform people about how we intend to do this, but also to enable people to engage with us and give us feedback. In terms of our aim, obviously, is to enable legitimate claimants whose claims are accurate to get their R&D payment as quickly and as easily as possible, whilst preventing the non-compliant claims from going through. Most non-compliant claims are, there is some relief due. It's just not the amount that's been claimed. There are some of them, however, where there is, about 1 in 7 claims in the small business scheme in the mandatory random inquiry programme that we carried out. We're not due any relief at all, in our view. So I appreciate that we've got to get that balance right, and we are, we are in a constant process, I think.
I mean, I appreciate it's sometimes a difficult balance when asking large organisations, and we fully appreciate the good work you do, but I think it's right also to examine whether you've got the balance right between trying to clamp down on fraud and error, as well as making sure that legitimate claims are suitably administered. I mean, and I suppose this comes down to 2 lines of questioning. One, the resource, but secondly, whether the necessary expertise is there. Can I kick off with the first? I mean, 9 bosses told the FT that the UK tax agency's administration of the flagships schemes left them moving, in other words, R&D tax credits, left them, and I quote, exploring moving overseas or scrapping plans to create jobs or invest, while 2 more said it had stunted their company's growth. And I just move you on to a specific example. I mean, Matthew Miller, co-founder of Really Clever, said that he was considering moving its operations abroad after the fungal discovery platform was asked to repay £44,000 in relief, a request by HMRC that the company disputed. And he goes on to say, quote, it is completely contradictory to be wanting to be a tech superpower, he said, adding that officials had denied requests to discuss the claim on a call. Now, I've got a list of, I'm not going to, rest assured, quote them all, but that is one example of clients, if you like, customers, who are not happy, entrepreneurs who want to grow in this country, who want to employ, but are thinking of moving jobs overseas. What would you say to Mr. Miller?
So, I'm obviously well aware of those feelings and that feedback. One of the part of that balancing act is we can do our checks before we make payment. We can make payment and then do checks. Obviously, the advantage of the first is certainty for the claimants, because they know when we pay them that we've been through the claim and we're satisfied that that's the amount that they're entitled to. And there's therefore, the risk that we will come along afterwards and say you weren't entitled to all of that, you need to pay some of it back, is removed. But the downside of that, of course, is that it builds in delay in receiving your money. So one of the trade-off choices we have to make in our compliance approach is when do we do checking pre-payment versus when do we do checking post-payment. And at the moment, roughly about a third of our checks are pre-payment and about 2/3.
Can I, if I may just suggest, I would have been slightly more heartened, comforted perhaps even, if I'd heard from you that you recognised there was an issue and you were putting more resource into sorting it, unless you're saying it's not an issue, and these are a very small minority of cases.
In terms of resources, there is no backlog of R&D claims. We've got a service standard to process them within 40 days, and either pay them at that point or notify the claimant that we've got concerns and that we want to carry out checks, and we are meeting that service standard.
Without exception? I mean, you're meeting it full stop.
I can't say without exception, but certainly, there is no, I do not have a backlog that is not meeting that. And we have increased the resources on R&D about 5-fold over the last 2 years in response to this. I think one of the key changes that the government has helped us make, because there have been a number of measures announced by the government to help us to administer the relief whilst managing error and fraud, is one of the issues that we had in the past was there's very little information that people had to submit with claims. They did not have to submit them online, and therefore our ability to risk assess them and identify claims that we did not have concerns about that we want to just go through versus those that we do was impaired. We've now got a number of new requirements. First of all, you have to make your claim online. Secondly, you have to supply additional information with your claim, and that should enable us to improve the quality of our risk assessment and reduce the extent to which legitimate claimants are caught up in compliance checks that they should not be caught up in. The other area is expertise, and that is a real challenge on R&D. My people they're tax inspectors. They're not software engineers or rocket scientists. You know, they meet a vast range of claims in areas in which they do not have expertise. And really, you know, our approach to compliance is to ask the claimant to demonstrate that they have thought through why their claim qualifies for relief. But the Chancellor has also recently announced that we will be appointing an expert advisory panel to assist the department in the areas where we clearly do not have the scientific expertise.
Thank you for that. I'm pleased to hear about the increased resource in recent years being put across, because that is reassuring. Can I just press you a little bit there on the expertise? I mean, ministers in March have said that the new panel that has been created would provide insights into R&D across critical sectors, including technology and life sciences. Now, these can be very specialist and are very specialist sectors, which you wouldn't normally expect government departments to have a depth of expertise in. I mean, certainly some of the businesses that spoke to the FT accuse the agency of lacking expertise and producing error in its processing of claims, echoing wider industry concerns. I'll give you one example. Paul Morley, Chief Executive of Herschel Infrared, said the heating company had been told it owed more than £31,000 to the government despite not receiving the value of an R&D claim in cash or a reduced tax bill from HMRC. He described it as a complete miscarriage of justice. And he and others are talking, when it comes to the expertise element of this, of moving jobs overseas. I mean, I'm trying to be fair here, but you have a government department dealing with a very specialist area that even parts of the city struggle with sometimes. What additional measures do you think are needed to ensure you've got this balance right? And do you think this sort of panel is going to help in a material way?
I think a significant number of measures have already been taken, but not all of which we will be seeing the effect of. I mean, they've been introduced in a lot of them came in, for example, in 2023. The benefit of that will take some time to come through. Our aim is, first of all, to get companies to focus on their claim, because unfortunately a significant number of claimants, they use an agent. We have seen this market populated now with agents of variable quality, some of whom push their claimants into making highly speculative claims. When we come along to investigate, sometimes the company will say, I don't know anything about this claim. This agent came along, said they could get us some money back, and they've gone. So one of the measures that have been taken is there must be a named officer in the company who is responsible for the quality of the claim. We've also been working on improving standards in the agent community that support claimants. So we've got an educational programme for agents, and we've also got an anti-abuse unit which aims to tackle those agents that we think are giving spurious advice. And another measure that the government has introduced is that claimants must tell us the identity of anyone who's advised them in making their claim. And then, whilst there are sectors like the ones you've described where it's well known they will be involved in R&D, we have seen a significant number of claims from rather surprising sectors. So, for example, last September, we wrote out to about 7,500 care homes because we were seeing R&D claims from care homes, which is not a sector in which you would expect that there's lots of R&D done. And what we've been doing there is making sure that they are educated about R&D so that when they are approached by one of these agents and given a promise about what can be achieved, they've actually think, oh, I've actually had something from the taxman that's saying, take care, yours is not a sector that we would normally expect to qualify for this relief. So it is a challenging relief to deliver. It is, we are well aware that we must administer it in a way that achieves its objectives, but it has a £1.13 billion error and fraud gap in it, which is an extraordinarily high proportion of the relief.
Okay, two quick questions, given time is short. One, if you're talking about these spurious agents going around encouraging people to make claims, that is a waste of public money. What would you like, or is enough being done to deal with that, and what would you like the government to do if it's not?
Well, the government has introduced two measures. One, that there must be a named person in the company that takes responsibility for the claim and therefore focus on what this agent is doing on their behalf. Secondly, they must tell us the identity of the agents and advisors they have used, and we obviously know which ones we think are good and which aren't. We've also worked with the Advertising Standards Agency to tackle promises that are made online, for example, that are clearly not achievable, and we've been forcing agents to change their messaging to potential clients as well. So the government has taken measures, we're taking steps. It's an ongoing...
It's a long road. Can I just one further, if I may, very quickly. When it comes, I suppose what I'm asking very finally is, it's difficult, how do you assess what is innovative? Do you have a resource whereby you can actually go to third parties outside the MHRC and actually get advice as to where that dividing line is? Because I can understand your predicament. You're not scientists or biologists.
Yes, so we will go to other parts of government, for example. DCIT or DEFRA, whatever the relevant department is, may have experts who can help us. But the purpose of setting up the external expert advisory panel is to address the fact that clearly within HMRC we do not have that range of expertise, and we will be exploring how we can make best use of that panel so that claimants who are clearly working on innovation get their claims paid as fast as they can and get certainty that they can keep the money, whereas those where it is much more questionable, get the right level of focus from our compliance.
Thank you very much. Angela, I think you had some further questions.
Yes, just some questions about the loan charge, which is an ongoing issue. And whilst we're on agents doing potentially dodgy things, certainly there's an issue in and around the loan charge subject, which is about the mis-selling of some of these products over quite a few years by what we might also call agents and people who probably profited very much from them, isn't there?
Yes, definitely. So, the loan charge obviously is a specific policy intervention applying to a specific point in time, but disguised remuneration tax avoidance is an enduring problem. Whilst we have significantly reduced marketed avoidance in recent years, so the tax gap from it has gone down from about $1.5 billion in 2005-06 to about $500 million in 21-22. The key area where there is persistent promotion of avoidance is in employment taxes, specifically disguised remuneration schemes focused at sort of gig workers and contractors. There are a hard
There are very many gig workers and contractors. Mm-hmm. There's a big financial incentive to declare income in a different way to employment because the taxes on it are lower. So this is an area where there's plenty of potential for tax avoidance. But I suppose my question with respect to the loan charge was really about how people were drawn into this originally, because you are pursuing those who owe money, and many people would say that's the right thing to do, although there'd be some complaints about how and how far back you've gone. But what I worry about is the mis-selling that went on of these schemes in the first place, which was only picked up much later on. Quite often these schemes weren't picked up at all for years, and yet clearly the people who owe the tax are being asked to repay, and it's ruinous for some. But at the same time, those people that profited by selling these schemes in the first place appear to have got away scot-free.
Yes, so mis-selling, there is, historically there were probably many more, but there are now a core of maybe 20 or 30 firms that really promote this avoidance. Many of them based offshore. They do this online. And one of the key measures that we've taken is that we have a joint enforcement notice with the Advertising Standards Authority, and we've had websites closed down, and we have forced amendments to what websites say so that they do not actively mislead potential clients. Another area, and then now a key area that this tends to flow through is certain umbrella companies. So, many agency workers and contract workers will be employed by an umbrella company, and then an agency will post them out to end user clients. And some of those umbrella companies are set up as vehicles to push this type of avoidance. And the government, in the last week, has announced that it is minded to introduce a requirement for due diligence checks in labour market chains to try and tackle that.
Is this list of dodgy companies that push these schemes available publicly?
We do publish the names of promoters of tax avoidance schemes and their schemes. We also undertake that where we detect that we believe a worker has got into an employment taxes avoidance scheme, that within 2 months of us knowing that, we will contact them and tell them, we believe you are in a tax avoidance scheme, please contact us if you want to get out of it, and we will help you to get out of it. So that's trying to address a criticism from the past that people were, used these schemes over a very long period of time before they realised that they were in trouble. Now we try to notify people as soon as we possibly learn, rather than wait till we've conducted an investigation.
The Morse report actually suggested that you don't go back to 1999, which is where you were going back to in the loan scheme issue itself, but only back 10 years. You are putting that into effect. You have put that in.
Yes, so the government has legislated for the Morse recommendations. So the loan charge initially applied to loans made as far back as 1999. Yeah. It now only applies to loans made from 2010, or in certain circumstances from 2016.
So you've recently started using your powers under Section 684 in relation to those affected by the loan charge. How many? The last number I saw was that you'd issued 3,000 letters. Is that an accurate number now? Is there many more letters that you're intending to issue, and how much tax is at stake via the Section 684 power letters that you're issuing?
I'm sorry, I don't have information about the volumes or the amount of tax.
Let us know.
Yes, I can write to you. Yeah.
I suppose also I want to ask you whether any of the companies that made quite a lot of money pushing these schemes for years have actually been brought to book by HMRC. You are clearly pursuing individuals, some of whom will have been perfectly aware of what they were doing, but many of whom will have thought that they were probably complying because they will have been missold these disguised remuneration packages. How many of the mis-selling companies that made a fortune over the years selling this stuff have you actually brought to book and or prosecuted?
Yeah, so first of all, picking up the point about people being misled, yes, one of the, there is really no doubt that none of these schemes work to avoid the tax, but they are sold on the basis that they will. So people are very much misled into believing that if they use these schemes they will succeed, and we have sought to publicise the fact that that's not the case. As I said, we use the joint enforcement notice with the Advertising Standards Agency.
Going back, I don't mean going forward, because I'm satisfied that you're looking at ways of closing some of these loopholes going forwards, but I'm talking about the loan charge issue going back, because There's a lot of people involved. You'll tell us how much money is involved when you write to us.
Yep.
But the issue here, and clearly you're going after the individuals who avoided paying tax, some of whom are finding themselves in extremely difficult circumstances as a result, and many of whom probably were reasonably innocently thinking that this would work, perhaps rather optimistically but innocently. How many of the companies that made a lot of cash mis-selling this stuff to perhaps naive people who are now finding themselves in trouble have you chased and prosecuted? The companies, not the individuals.
So, first of all, generally speaking, the promoters of the tax avoidance schemes, obviously they are not liable for the tax. It's not their tax bill. It is the workers' tax bill, which is why we
I understand
seek the tax.
that, but they are the tempters. They are the people that are exploiting and conning people into getting into a situation where they're on the wrong side of the law.
For a lot of this period, there were very few sort of financial sanctions that could be applied to these promoters. Also, the promotion of tax avoidance in itself is not a criminal offence, so we cannot prosecute and convict people.
The promotion of tax avoidance isn't a criminal offence.
No, the promotion of tax avoidance in itself is not a criminal offence, but we do look for any evidence that the promoter of a tax avoidance scheme has committed a criminal offence in the course of promoting it, and we have prosecuted and convicted promoters of tax avoidance, not in relation to loan charge. I believe that in relation to disguised remuneration, I believe one person involved in the promotion of it has been convicted of a related offence. But I did write to the committee and said this.
Not very many, though, is it? It's not going to put people off who've got no compunction to mis-sell their dodgy schemes to people from doing it because they're going to expect the taxman to knock on their door and prosecute them for it.
What we so far, it is a key part of our anti-avoidance strategy that we tackle the promoters of tax avoidance. First of all, they are under a legal obligation to tell us. They have to notify us of the schemes that they are selling. If they don't do that, they can be fined. And as recently as February this year, there was a fine of £900,000 levied on a promoter. In 2022, a fine of £1 million. In addition, in certain circumstances, we can issue them with a stop notice, which legally obliges them to stop selling their scheme. And the government announced in the budget, the Chancellor announced in his budget this year that he will make it a criminal offence not to comply with that notice. Previously, there was a financial penalty, but it was not a criminal offence. We also publish the names of promoters and their schemes, and then we use that in a marketing campaign to workers to say, you should steer clear of these people.
Perhaps the gate is closed for that, but I'm trying to ask you about whether you can take any action against the people that have got those with outstanding loan charge problems into the situation they're in. So going back, the people that missold these schemes in the first place, which has led to such misery for many people. Are you saying that there's not a lot you can do about that because it's too late?
There's often no sanction that we can apply to those people. We do look at whether a criminal offence may have been committed, and if there is, we criminally investigate. And as I pointed out in my letter to the Chair, I think in February, we have secured convictions and prison sentences for promoters of tax avoidance, but in relation to disguised remuneration, I think there's been one related offence that we've established so far.
I've got a few last questions. One is around the online journey that you're taking people on, because I did do my own self-assessment and payment online this year, and I have to say I was quite worried that I was paying money perhaps to a fraudulent front page, and I just wondered if people are still being tricked by fake HMRC fraud pages. Or has that issue gone away?
No, there are scams attempted on our customers all the time, and in fact in the last couple of days we've had an issue with people being sent QR codes which purport to come from HMRC. They're asked to click on those and enter personal information. We have gone out immediately to say we will never send a QR code that asks you to do this. This is a scam. We have become quite effective at identifying the scams and acting quickly to block them. So we block websites, we take down mobile sort of SMS factories. But this is a reason
why people are going to be very worried going on this digital journey with you. You mentioned earlier about the app, and 200,000 people used it a year ago. Now 250,000. At that pace of adoption, it's going to take an awfully long time.
I should have said 250 million. Right?
Yeah. So yes, if I might. So we've had 5.2 million people who've downloaded the app since it went live, and we had 3.8 million unique users of that this year. I think one of the things back to the move forward of the digital journey is actually awareness of the app. I don't know about you, but
I hadn't heard of it until very recently.
Exactly,
and I chair
right.
the Treasury Select.
Totally. So there's about 21%. We reckon about 21% of people are aware of the app, and we release new services into the app every month. We're broadly increasing, and our big challenge. So we talked a bit about whether or not with the changes to the phone lines we're unable to pursue our digital strategy. Actually, the level of usage of our digital services is increasing every month.
We're aiming to get the app adoption.
Exactly right. So our aim is to drive app usage up across the entire of the personal tax
What
base.
level by when?
So we've got targets. I would have to write to you with the details, but we're absolutely seeking to drive that. But there is exponential growth in the use of our digital services.
And Chair, I should have clarified the 250 million figure I mentioned is for all digital accesses to all of our online services, app and gov.uk.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of the app services, you're also going to be able to do self-serve in terms of getting your taxes right on that app, are you?
Yes, so there's a variety of services which we're seeking to put through there, some of which are about information services. So, for instance, your national insurance number is stored there, or your national insurance record is on there, your state pension forecasting is on there. So some of which is information which people regularly ring to ask us about.
Yeah.
Also things like your employment history, one of the most regular things.
Not be able to get advice on your tax, like
you can.
Like this.
Yeah, sorry, you can. Yeah. So, I mean, I completed my self-assessment return on the mobile app this year and made payment on it as well. It links through to our digital assistant, which can answer your queries, and then from the digital assistant there is access to a web chat advisor if you need.
And that would cover things like capital gains, hypothetically where you've bought a council house under right to buy and you want to get your tax right on that. That would also be covered in your app, would it?
Yes, so we have extensive online guidance on that, and we have 2 self-assessment help sheets. Yes, you can access that guidance via the app.
Okay. All right. And then in terms of a new, you said you wanted to get things much simpler, but there's a new complexity that I've been alerted to in the tax system where, let's say you're a hard-up mum trying to sell 35 bits of baby clothing online. All of a sudden, this apparently now has to be reported to HMRC that you've done more than 30 transactions online. That came into force at the beginning of this year. It's not likely to actually lead to any tax revenues. According to your impact assessment, it's cost about 35 million for you to get ready to receive all those reports. Is that an area you're thinking about potentially reducing complexity?
I'm glad you raised that with us, because I think a number of sort of hairs were set running earlier this year and what that meant, and it was a lesson for us in how people use social media to generate this take-up. So clearly more people are now trading online and selling goods online, which is liable to tax, as well as lots of mums selling surplus baby clothes, which is not liable to tax if they're simply selling
It's not liable to tax, but it's liable to the platform having to tell you that they've
done
it.
So we have got, there are now new rules that platforms must notify us of sales on their platforms in certain circumstances. That doesn't impact on the seller, but it gives us more information so that we can, identify traders who are selling online who may not be declaring to us. But I want to reassure the mum who is selling the clothes that her baby has grown out of on eBay or whatever, that is not a taxable source of income, and we would not be contacting
it is
her.
going to have to be reported to HMRC. You've had to invest in people and resources to be able to receive those reports.
I mean, I'm sure we will. I'm sure we will test and learn. We have set the limits at the level that we believe will give us information that is useful to us, without too much information that is not useful to us. But I'm sure we will monitor that over time and adjust those limits if we need to. We are not interested in information about a mum selling the clothes that her baby has grown out of, because it's got no tax consequences. But we are interested in the trader who is making a living increasingly not selling on the high street but selling online, because they have to pay tax like everybody else.
Well, listen, we heard today that you're on this journey. You're on a journey to try and be digital first. I think we also heard a lot of concerns from the most law-abiding people in the land, who are the ordinary taxpayer, trying to get their taxes right with yourselves, about the fact that there's still quite a lot of challenges for you on that journey. I think what would be very helpful to this committee, if you were able to share the strategic plans that you have, the strategic direction of travel, things like what the objectives are for getting uptake of your app and by certain dates, so that we can continue, I'm afraid, this will be to be continued, to hold your feet to the fire in terms of this journey that you've decided to take the British public on. Thank you very much. Order.
Thank you.
The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended.